You think you know everything about the stick bait? You use it a lot. It's one of your go-to lures, one of the most popular lures in bass fishing. Maybe there's some things you don't know about it and some ways that you can use it to help you when the bite dries up or things get tough. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about some things with the stick bait that you may not know. This is one of the most popular baits in bass fishing. It's caught a lot of fish, it's cashed a lot of checks for people. But maybe there's some things you don't know about it, some ways you can use it to be more versatile, maybe some accessories with it that make it more versatile for you, and maybe fishing it in some times that you wouldn't otherwise consider it can be effective for you using some of these things we're going to talk about today. One of the first things we're going to talk about is when to use this thing. I mean, we throw this thing all season long and catch fish with it all season long, but there's times when it is more effective than others, and some things about it that I maybe didn't know before. For sure, this thing is effective when you get around the spawn. Whether there's eggs on the bass's beds and you drop this thing and it flutters down and falls right into the eggs, which could imitate a bluegill very effectively. And I think a lot of the reasons it can effectively imitate the bluegill is because of the rate of fall with certain techniques. If you use it wacky rigged, of course, it can flutter down through the water column, and if it falls right in the eggs, the bass are going to think it's a bluegill and they're going to eat it. At other times, if you're Texas rigging it, you can pull anything Texas rigged through a bed if a bass is guarding a bed, and they'll attack it. So I don't know that you specifically need the stick bait when the eggs are on the bed. But it's a whole different world when the fry come out, and when the bass fry hatch and they start to all hatch out, and now they're fry and they're kind of swimming around in the bedding area, and that bass is now guarding a bigger area, including the third dimension. When it's just eggs and everything's on the bottom, the bass can see the eggs on the bottom and they're just guarding that particular location. Once those little eggs start to pop and fries start to be in suspension, now anything that's falling through that area and is a target for longer is going to be attacked. And a lot of times we mistake it for a feeding bite when it is a self-defense bite from the fry garters. And you can get into an area where there's a lot of beds and they're all in that, they're all balls of fry in all the bedding area, and now the bass are just protecting this three-dimensional area now with the fry around, and you've got this stick bait that's imitating a bluegill or a fish, a bait fish, big bait fish that's going to maybe attack those fry, and it's falling subtly through their fry area. It's going to get hit. And a lot of times we think it's a feeding bite, and it's really just a pure self-defense bite. And so now you've got a pretty wide range. You got all that time from when they're on the beds and guarding eggs, and it drops onto it, into all the time when the fry is getting bigger and they're guarding the fry in these areas, and now they're guarding that three-dimensional area. That's quite a span of time that the stick bait can be very effective, and you'll notice it in that time period. So super effective around the spawn, super effective for fry garters. Not that you want to be intentionally targeting them, but when you're fishing a big area and if you're in a tournament situation, it's an effective way to catch them because it's in the water column for longer than most other baits that don't suspend. Jerk baits work very well, but the stick bait is super effective. Now on to the sneaky stuff. There's some times when you can use this, certainly much later in the season. I talked a lot in a previous video about fall fishing and how effective, say, crankbaits are on shallow flats with weeds, and they can be. But then I've had that bite just disappear. So one day I'm out with a shallow crankbait and I catch a limit in 35 minutes of nice fish that are feeding up on a shallow weedy flat. And then the next day a front moves in or something and the bite dies. I can't get anything on a moving bait. And in the past I've just moved on. I've moved out to the weed edge and just assumed the fish have left the building because of the frontal conditions. And in reality, the fish were still there. They were just not chasing a moving bait. And so there's a technique that can be very effective, and I wanted to share it with you. And it's using the standard stick bait with a little accessory. And the accessory I have here, you can get them in a number of different places, but this one's from Harmony Fishing Company. And this thing is a tail spinner. And it basically is a little screw lock with a willow leaf or Colorado leaf blade with a swivel on it in either a silver or copper color, and it's got a little twist lock on here. And what you can do is if you take your stick bait and you find the tapered end of the stick bait and you just square it off. So take a scissors and just cut off the end of it. And on that squared off end, you can run that stick bait, or that, you can run that blade, the twist lock in there partially. And now what you've got is a stick bait with that little spinner on the end of it. And now in those same areas that you just cranked through, you can now pull this through, and you can pull it through in a number of ways. And in this situation I'm talking about, I'm gonna cast it out and I'm gonna reel it right through those areas slowly where I was previously throwing that crankbait. I'm gonna use an EWG style hook. Here I've got a 3/0 EWG style hook, and you can rig it in a couple of ways. This is a 3/0, you can use a 4/0, you can use a 5/0. I mean, the bigger the hook, the further back you're gonna get the hook point, but you can Texas rig it with the standard way of hooking in just about, you know, 1/2 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch in, and Texas rig it in that manner so that it's Texposed right there on the bait, and you can reel that in. And if you get short bit because they're attacking the spinner bait, you can run that thing in further. So I'll back it out a little bit here and I'll show you. I can actually take and run that thing in maybe that far, right? And I'll pop out. And now when I bring this thing out into the worm here, coming all the way down, now I have run that thing down further, and now I'm Texposed down further on that worm, so the line is going to come up the worm here. And now I've brought that hook point down further on the stick bait. So if you're getting short struck, you can always run it down the worm a little bit, or the stick bait a little bit. And then if you still get short bit, you can move to a bigger hook so that the hook, you do the same thing, but the hook point keeps coming back down. If you use a 4/0, hook point's going to come down to about here. If you use a 5/0, you know, or whatever, the hook point's going to come down to here. So you can kind of fix it that way. But then you're using a Texas rig weight that brings it, you know, about the speed you want it for how fast you need to be reeling it to get bit. But if you take this through those areas where you were getting bites the previous day on a crankbait, now you slow down and run this through, you can get a lot of bites that you thought the fish were gone. So that's an effective way to use that tail spinner. The other way that you can use it is the other ways that you can rig the stick bait. I like to use a silicone band. I'll show you that silicone band right there. I don't know if you can see that. I think so. Yep. I cut those to size. I get these off of eBay. I'll leave a link out there for you on the description, but I'll put a band on there on my stick baits instead of using rings. I've got the standard rubber rings in the tool, but I'll use a band in a banding tool and get a band on there, and I don't lose as many. And then I use it in a couple of ways. I'll either use it in the Senko style, where I'll run a tungsten Senko weight and a drop shot style hook on a Senko rig through that, right through the middle of it. So I'm essentially wacky rigging this through that band, right? And then I'll do the same thing. I'll cut that square end off, and I'll come through that squared off end from the taper end with that thing, and I'll put that tail spinner on the Senko rig, and then I'm weighting one end of it. So I'll put the spinner on one end, and then I'll put that tungsten nail weight in that end, and I'll Senko rig this, and it'll fall, and that spinner will spin on the way down, and it just gives a whole different look to that Senko rig with that tail spinner on there. So I'll do it that way, and then I'll also use a weighted, your standard weighted stick bait style hook, and I'll run that the same way, the same exact setup, except I won't have that one. Since the weight's centered on it, you won't have the nail weight in it. So you'll run that thing up like this, Get that on there, right? You got to make sure you get the hook through the band. There. And then I'll run it like that. That's a little more centered. As this thing falls, that tail spinner is still spinning. So tail spinner is kind of a little bit of a secret weapon. If you're fishing around other people that are using stick baits, if you're using another method, a more active method, and now you want to switch up, that tail spin, slow reeled stick bait can be deadly. It can get you fish on days when you otherwise aren't going to get fish with moving baits. So it's one of those adjustments. Slow down and try it. A lot of co-anglers have cleaned up behind their main angler by throwing this behind active baits. So it's a sleeper. It's one of those accessories you need. Everybody has stick baits. Now make sure that you have a couple of accessory options that you can put to this and make it more versatile even yet. And these can come in, like I said, I think I said before, typically you only need one size, that smaller size, but it's nice to have the willow leaf and the Colorado blade. I would use the willow leaf when I'm in heavy vegetation, and maybe the Colorado when I'm wanting a little more vibration and thump. I think the willow leaf comes through the thicker vegetation better. But then I'd have the silver and the copper, or silver and the gold colors. And then maybe I would also add a red to this. So I'd go red, silver, and gold, and then I'd have it in the willow and in the Colorado. And then you've got, it's like completely accessorizing your stick bait. And it serves a range of potential options to give you a different look on an already effective lure. Hope these tips were helpful. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time on the water.